It wasn't in any history book.
You've heard about the horrors of the Tulsa massacre, but have you ever heard about the Camilla massacre?
Take a pride in where you came from, no matter how small it is.
You've heard Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words resound in our nation's capital, but what about in Albany, Georgia?
The civil rights movement is not over.
Change is still sparking across southwest Georgia.
And Black history is more than a month.
According to experts on Black history in Albany, there is still so much that we don't know about the significance of Black citizens before the 1960s.
Because those who write history control the narrative, the need for Black researchers, historians, and educators in southwest Georgia is imperative to preventing repeats from the past.
In Thomasville, one man has dedicated his life's work to collecting documents and artifacts in hopes of educating people on the Black experience.
We took a trip to his museum, which has become a staple in the South.
We were stationed in Germany in 1979. My son, Jim, he said, Dad, the school was not involved with the Black History Week, and I could have easily told my son, boy, get on outside and play. You ain't got time for that. I didn't do that. And we cut out articles and made a collage and several posters. A few days later, Jim took them to school, and the teachers liked it. Then he went back to school a few more days. They had taken all the trophies out of the trophy case, and they had put his collection in that trophy case so all the kids could see what was going on for Black History Month. So it just been roller coaster.
When people walk through the front door, one of the first things they always say is, wow. They don't realize, first off, how big the museum is, and they don't realize the extent of the museum as well. So what you see when you walk through this, through our front door is a museum like no other. You can feel the warmth, the passion, and love that Mr. Hadley put in collecting all the pieces that we have here in the museum. The whole collection is spread over 3 gallery spaces. Our first gallery that really focuses on more national topics. So we have scientists and inventors, military history, civil rights. We do have a section in our first gallery for African history and slavery.
I can tell my history, but a lot of people don't want to talk about their history. They don't want to talk about what happened. My grandfather was a slave master, Simon Hadley Sr. Simon was one of the biggest slave owners in Thomas County, and he's one of the finest of Thomas County. It's important that your kids, you know, the grandbaby, great-grandbaby, your daughter, they need to know just what the struggle Blacks have gone through and where they're at today. If it wasn't for them, even though it took 400 years to get where we're at, we're still struggling today.
We focus on education. You know, we're a nonprofit, and so we usually have about 4,000 or 5,000 local students who come to the museum during Black History Month alone. And so making sure that we can tell the stories of local, regional, state, and the national African-American achievers, but then also telling an authentic experience is something that is so important right here in the museum.
When you have kids come to you and say, thank you, hug me, can I hug you? That's why I'm here.
If you write about race in 1850, you end up talking about race today because in many ways, so little has changed.
Parts of history can be hard to revisit, but one Thomasville plantation wants people to know what life as a plantation employee was like in the early 1900s. We were there as an exhibit was unveiled in one employee's honor.
We are very thoughtful with our interpretation, but thankfully we have, oral histories, we have documents, we have photographs.
A new exhibit takes visitors into the home of the plantation's former dog manager, Mac McQueen. Archives indicate that Mr. McQueen became dog manager in 1906. At any given time, there were 75 to 100 dogs at Pebble Hill that all received care from him.
We get so many questions about the staff that worked here and lived here, and I want people to be able to see the house. It's kind of the whole anchor of the exhibition is just the house itself.
The new exhibit opened just in time for Black History Month, but White hopes through family and neighbors more information can be added as archives grow.
It will be, an ongoing research project to further enhance the information, interpretation, and photographs.
Mr. McQueen lived in the home from 1928 until his death in 1939. which is why the cottage has always been known as Mac's house.
We're just an example of a former quail plantation, but there are still those that operate today. And so we are a great resource, we hope, for people to learn about a culture and a world that is in the woods, but it's pretty remarkable and it's very unique to this Red Hills region. And so we take that as very important to us because we are representative of that for the region, you know, worldwide.
To soar toward what's possible, you must leave behind what's comfortable.
Movers and shakers in Albany stepped out against police, city leaders, and Jim Crow policies in the 60s in hopes of achieving racial harmony and equality in the future. Frank Wilton wants to set the record straight in saying that the Albany Civil Rights Movement was a catalyst for change in other cities across America and still is today.
The one thing that is often lost when talking about the Albany movement is the fact that Martin Luther King did not start the Albany movement. He brought the cameras, he brought the newspapers to Albany, Georgia. I've never seen a better cooperation with black, white, young, old, Protestant, Catholic, Jew, Gentile, all of the things that Martin stood for. Sometimes I almost wish that we stayed in a crisis mode just to have that level of harmony. But that being said, as long as you have a group of people who feel that they are superior to another, you're going to have a problem. And as long as you have a group of people who allow folk to let them think they're superior, you're going to have a problem. So I think that to answer your question, race relations in Albany is evolving. It's not ideal. It's not what it once was. It's not what it could be. But I think that we have wonderful opportunities to improve.
Here in the historic Shiloh Baptist Church in Albany, Georgia, talking with Angie Gibson Jones, the first female chairman of the Historic Preservation Commission in Albany.
That's correct.
Talk about your role.
We have applicants that come before us whose properties are located in the historic district. And if you want to do certain design changes, there are specific guidelines that govern whether or not those design changes can take place. If you're requesting a demolition, those things have to come before the HPC because it is an historical area.
We're actually sitting in, as I mentioned, the historic Shiloh Baptist Church. This is where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke.
Yes, he came here only to do one speech in 1961 from a telegraph that he received from Dr. William Anderson, who was the president of Albany Movement at that time. And he spoke here, and it was so many people here that they had to kind of split the crowd up. And after he spoke here and went across the street to Mount Zion, he spoke and he came back and forth. But then it was he was so motivational to the movement that they decided also to march. Some people have a misconception that African Americans didn't have an impact until the Civil Rights Movement. That's not true. Every era we have made some type of contribution. And it's so much history that we should be venturing out and trying to discover, but it must start at home. We have to sit down and learn our own family stories and then venture out and learn stories of all cultures. And in my travels as a freedom singer or either when I'm doing research, I'm contracted out from time to time to do research projects, I find that people that are not from Albany have more appreciation of our history than people living right here in Albany. So I believe God placed it on my heart to start on the book, and I started on it about 3 years before the time period of the pandemic. I knew that the basis would be an underground railroad, and there are a lot of misconceptions about the Underground Railroad and exactly where those routes were, and so I wanted to make it factual as far as the actual routes, to show that the routes didn't just go to up north, didn't just go to Canada. So I wanted to use that to feature that, to educate, to show, well, hey, it wasn't just this one little central location. And in African Americans, that's the hardest thing to prove our historical integrity, because we don't have documents. We don't have, as far as a birth certificate, to even prove.
Listed
exactly.
Property.
Exactly.
Property.
Exactly. And in order to prove historical significance, you have to have that documentation.
Don't let anybody convince you this is the way the world is and therefore must be. It must be the way it ought to be.
Albany's Alice Coachman didn't let the unwritten rules on race deter her from paving the way for African Americans in the sports realm. She became the first black woman from any country to win an Olympic gold medal. We asked her family how she managed to overcome discrimination and unequal access to inspire generations of other black competitors.
Alice Coachman was a trailblazer for those in track and field. She faced many challenges back then, but she often said you have to have the guts to get up and keep going. I spoke with Alice Coachman's son, and he says that he was born after his mom received that title, but felt like it was a sign from God.
Her legacy will always be that, I think as my grandmother said, that God just saved the honor for her to be the first African American to win a gold medal in the Olympics.
Coachman is best known for her high jumping performance in the 1948 Olympics in London. After achieving such a high honor, a park was named after her following an elementary school.
The school first opened in 1999. It is great to honor Ms. Coachman. She was the first black African American to win an Olympic medal. And as being a track athlete myself, that was something great. I was excited and I'm glad to come to work every day.
Her son described how there were many other great people who came before her, but Coachman had to wait 8 years to be able to compete.
Probably be tenacious. She was very persistent and determined and steadfast. She had to wait 8 years from when she actually started in her track and field career to go to the Olympics. The 1940 Olympics were canceled. The 1948 Olympics were canceled because of World War II.
Keep on walking, keep on talking, marching up to freedom land.
Marvin Broadwater, he's a Camilla native, has been working for years to make sure an historical marker is placed right here in front of the courthouse in Mitchell County to let people know about the Camilla Massacre.
It's Georgia history, it's Mitchell County history, it's Camilla history, and it's Albany's history, it's Southwest Georgia history. I grew up in this town. I still love this town. And, you know, I'm 60 plus years old. I never knew about this incident till someone emailed me and sent this to me, and they kind of made a comment and said, "Hey, aren't you from Camilla?" And when I saw it, it just compelled me. Something took over and said, we've got to honor those that lost their lives here. In 1868, there were 28 African Americans elected to the Georgia Assembly. So, but when they got to the Assembly and they got ready to be installed and take their oath, the Georgia Assembly ousted them. Because they had 1/8 of African American blood in them. Those 28 came home. One by the name of Philip Joyner, who was from Albany, Georgia, he decided to get some folks to come down to a Republican rally. Once they got here to the outskirts of Camilla, the sheriff met them and said, "Look, we don't want you to bring this into our town. If you bring this into our town, there are going to be consequences and repercussions." As they entered the courthouse, if you see behind you, there's a storefront. They had rifles lined up. People had been deputized by the sheriff, lined up and ready to fire upon. It was some 200 odd people as marchers. 12 of them were instantly killed right here. It has been a great learning experience in getting this marker up. But I didn't do it by myself. A lot of people give me the credit for it. All I did was just plant the seed, and others helped me help it to grow. And we're here now, but now that there's another phase. The next phase is to continue to educate the next generation. Because like I said, Jim, if you don't know your history and it's bad, you're doomed to repeat it.
Turning a blind eye to our history has not saved us from its consequences.
Acclimating to life post-Revolutionary War and post-slavery was a difficult transition for many African Americans. That is why the Pones Aiding Society was born. Now here's more on the work that James Pone started in the late 1800s, and it is in place in Albany today.
James Archie Pone was born in North Carolina on November 11, 1876. He was a descendant of a slave who earned his freedom by serving in the Revolutionary War. In 1919, James A. Pone came to Albany, and after developing a working relationship with J.W. Hawley, founder of Albany State University, Pone decided to start the Pones Aiding Society to help ex-slaves transition into society as freed men and women.
It's like you got a field out there, there's cows, and one day you open the field out and say, bye, leave, with no preparation, no skills, no nothing other than being a slave. So that's what happened at the end of slavery. They just opened the gate and said, bye, y'all gone. And so we were ill prepared to survive as free people.
Aiding societies would help Black people with things such as food, clothing, securing jobs, and even finding a place to be buried. Harper tells me back then, Black people were not allowed to be buried within city limits. When the cemetery was first started, the Albany city limit was the Flint River. So the cemetery, located on the corner of Old Radium Springs Road and East Highland Avenue, was technically the county. Harper's extensive research also helped him to uncover a few other former slaves and even veterans buried in the cemetery, including one with a Purple Heart. While some of the graves in this graveyard may not be easily seen to the untrained eye, Michael Harper is doing his best to keep their names alive. James Archie Pone died on May 12, 1970 at 93 years old. He worked most of his life to help educate others and to improve their lives. Those ideals created a simple belief for Michael Harper. Before you get to where you want to go, you have to understand where you have been.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around.
If you know whence you came, there is really no limit to where you can go.
Now, before 1964, Black students in Dougherty County had to attend different schools than white students, even if they were all the way across town. But a group of 6 students changed that by integrating Albany High School. Beverly Plummer Wilson was one of those 6.
He said, I press forward. I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus.
We met at C.B. King office, all the ones who wanted to sign up. And on the first day, they came and picked us up and we went on in the cars. And everybody was standing around, cameras and everything, so we went on in.
This empty lot is the former Monroe High School. It was that way until 1960 when it became Carver Junior High. Marlene Edwards was a teacher here. She said the real injustice was the difference in resources between the 2 high schools.
When the books ordered new books for white children, those books were sent to us. Sometimes the pages were torn out. Many things, but that's more than just learning the page of the book. You have to get a student to feel very good about themselves.
That was a segregation right there. I had journalism that was taught, speech. I didn't have none of that at Monroe High School. The whites disintegrated from the school, which some of them probably didn't want to leave, but their parents was a big part of their life.
Because of this white flight from Albany High, Dougherty County school system became predominantly Black, the way it still is now.
Most of those who left and went to Lee County, went to these other places, they come back to Albany to work. So if it's good enough for you to work here, to put food on your table, to have you someplace to stay, then you contribute financially where you've gotten your finance from.
Of the nearly 14,000 students currently in the Dougherty County school system, 12,000 are Black. Nearly all are considered economically disadvantaged, according to the Governor's Office of Student Achievement.
They still have opportunities. Even though people look at Lee County as more advanced, they get more, but still, there's still progress. Because you can't take away that.
We must never forget that Black history is American history. The achievements of African Americans have contributed to our nation's greatness.
Well, since 1906, fraternities and sororities in the Divine Nine have been facing the challenges on college campuses as a united front. In 2023, these African American organizations have produced business owners, government leaders, and even Hollywood stars. But what most people don't know is that Black Greek letter organizations do not stop their activities or service to the community once they've graduated. DeMarcus Green says being a role model for the younger generations is part of the commitment of a Black Greek letter organization.
I think it's very important to be a mentor to them, because if they don't have anyone to follow and take the right steps, they'll fall to what they see on the internet or social media, which could be a good or bad thing.
Serving your mankind and doing something for somebody else. And you want, when someone comes behind you, what did I leave? I left my love and my passion for serving mankind.
As the fight for preservation, restoration, and education continues, Black history lives on in the men and the women of Southwest Georgia.
So collect things, memories, and stories, and share the Black experience with anyone who will listen any time of the year, because as we hope you've learned, Black history is more than a month.